Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first lecture of this new year. I'm thrilled to be introducing tonight's guests, Kersten Geers and David van Severen of Office KGDVS, based in Brussels. The first time I encountered Office's work was during the 2007 Rotterdam Biennale. It was curated by Pier Vittorio Aureli and adopted a number of lenses to reconsider the future of the city. I remember Kersten and David's proposal as quite distinct: a perfect square with a central courtyard for the city of Ceuta, designed to negotiate the migration of people from North Africa into Spain. The proposal stood out amidst others for its stark visuals, the simplicity of its form, and complexity of what was suggested, a kind of perfect mix of politics and aesthetics, all in simple black lines that formed a powerful square. The next time was in 2008, when 100 of us were invited to the desert of Ordos in Inner Mongolia to design a single-family home. Office's proposal embraced the square again, this time as a multi-story courtyard house sunken deep into the ground in a radical negation of context. Since then, Office has developed a style of representation that has inspired architects at schools as well as in offices around the world. Something about their simple black lines, combined with the intensely textured axonometric collages, whose painterly atmospheric effects are reminiscent of early David Hockney paintings, and render the work simultaneously monumental and understated. We certainly have seen a number of Kersten's amazing influence here at the school, and you can always trace back perfect square portfolios to a studio with him. So beware, he will be back. Founded in 2002, Office first made waves in 2005 with their competition-winning proposal, A Grammar for the City, for the design of a new administrative capital in South Korea for 500,000 people. This was done in collaboration with Dogma and Pier Vittorio Aureli. In 2008, they designed the Belgian Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale, entitled After the Party. Surrounding the Belgian Pavilion in a steel box, they left the inside of the pavilion almost entirely empty, except for a dusting of confetti on the ground, recreating once more the perfect courtyard square house they had been looking for some time. This project embodied Office's position, which, in their words, does not invent architecture, but reflect and consider what architecture can signify and be today, reducing architecture to its bareness and essence. Office's practice is deeply rooted in writing and teaching. Kersten teaches at the EPFL in Lausanne and is founding member of the magazine San Rocco, and David at the École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture in Versailles. The past May, they published Architecture Without Content, a compilation of their design studios, including those held here at the school. This summer, they also created a beautiful exhibition in Los Angeles entitled The Small Museum for the American Metaphor. Sharing their position and a commitment to architecture that is at once radical, critical, beautiful, and engaged in finding new possibilities for the discipline in the world today, I wanted to share this quote from Architecture Without Content. Architecture without content is architecture reduced to its very perimeter. Only the economy of the envelope determines the success of the building. Its radical frugality does not make it less critical. Economy of means is the weapon of choice to express its ideology. Architecture without content finds its roots in the big box. Architecture without content is too big to ignore. This thinking has allowed them to open up a new space for their practice, having already designed a great number of buildings either completed or under construction in Belgium, but also internationally. Last year, they won the competition to design a new building for the Radio Télévision Suisse in Lausanne, currently under construction. They are working on 2 urban renewal projects in Bahrain and are part of Solo Houses, a curated initiative by French developer Christian Bourdet of private homes 2 hours outside of Barcelona. They have also just recently completed the Faculty Architecture Library in Ghent, which will hold the largest collection of architecture books in Belgium. It's worthwhile noting that the Strand downtown is probably where you can still find Kersten at most hours when he is visiting New York. Tonight, they come to us having just participated in an afternoon of impunity at the Canadian Centre for Architecture in Montreal as one of the guest curators of the series Out of the Box, Abalos and Herreros. Please join me in welcoming one of the most interesting practice operating today, Kersten Geers and David van Severen.
Thank you, Amale. Perhaps we were thinking maybe we should show pictures only after this. We can only lose. But thanks again, really. And thank you, Amale, for inviting us. Thank you, Columbia, for having us again. I mean, indeed, it's always been extremely nice to be in the school. It's a very special place in the middle of New York City, and in this still very interesting master plan, we can meet and write. So David and myself, Kersten, we will juggle a little bit with microphones. We don't know how to do it. How do we do it?
Maybe this one works better, I don't know.
Yeah, I also think.
Yeah, so we're down to one microphone. We're asking two, but anyway.
Does it work like this? Oh. Yes. Well, we have this. We had practiced big dance together with microphones, but we will now just stand very close. We're sorry that the visual aspect of the lecture will be reduced to looking at slides. So, the difficult double. Of course, the difficult double is in many ways perhaps the idea of working together with two. Hello? Yeah? With two in one office. At the same time, the difficult double is also for us, through Venturi perhaps, an idea of an architecture which is always extremely ambiguous. So where one picture has many ideas, carries many thoughts, many other references. And of course, as Amale somehow literally referenced in her introduction, David Hockney, and this specific, though black and white reproduction of a painting from the mid-1970s, we felt was very representative for that what we would like to share with you this evening. So it's a glass table with a lot of objects, at the time belonging to his boyfriend, which left him, and in some way or another, the shadow, or the kind of shadow made by all these objects, create an echo of the shadow of the person there below on the table. Now, the difficult double for us is also an idea that one project always carries the promise of another one, or an echo of another idea. So here you have the Mexican border crossing project, which in one way or another is very reminiscent to this picture by Bas Prinsen, a photographer with whom we work very often. And this is one of his own photographs. It has nothing to do with our work, which in many ways started to become part of this accumulated knowledge. Of course, also, it is an attempt to create an architecture which in many ways is about experience, and very often about these things which we don't explicitly design. So here, a project which we'll come back to, where you see the palm trees through the, you could say, the filter of the curtain made out of very small pieces of metal. Perhaps in the same way as in the Biennale Pavilion in 2008, in the end, the confetti, although in a way an afterthought of a project which is ultimately about walling an already existing pavilion, became the protagonist in a project called After the Party.
So we'll show 5 doubles, 5 difficult doubles maybe. Starting with the first, you could say we were also introduced by a project in Ordos where we worked a lot with the idea of rooms. A house has many rooms. This is a picture of the apartment of Pablo Picasso in Cannes, and it intrigued us because it's just filled with, let's say, elements of life, room after room. And this, for us, as an idea of a house of rooms, we translate it in many of our projects. First project is a house in Belgium, on a single plot, single family house, in, let's say, at the edge of suburbia. I mean, Flanders, especially in Belgium, is built fully with small little houses, and each person tries still to make his own dream come true each time, again and again. So there's many of these, but our clients, they bought a plot quite special because it was really just at the border of such endless fields of houses, and here you can see the plot in white, or cut out as a project. In front we have fields, and in the back there is a forest. And for us, thinking this development of housing and single family houses endlessly repeated, and the idea or the dream of the luxury of that, we thought that was something to think about, especially because the plots are actually quite small. And every plot has its single fence to make it clearly your own property. For us, the fence became the main device to define the house, and we actually put it not on the border of the site, but inside, to become actually the first perimeter, which is the real house. As you can see, somehow at its margins, the site left a certain wilderness. So the idea of being back somehow in wilderness was very important when we constructed this house. At the same time, the fence forms this very, let's say, green perimeter, which changes over the year. Every season these leaves fall and come back, and it gives you a certain domesticated patio from which you can start, let's say, living the real house. And inside this perimeter is constructed a house based on a very simple idea of a plan of rooms. Rooms that have on the ground floor a very basic repetition. It's a cross plan, 9 rooms, and it doesn't have a facade, since you really immediately are in relation with the 2 domesticated patios of nature. On top of that, there's the same plan, let's say, repeated, but in a very different way. It is, as you can see here, it is a house of 3 meters high, very elementary on the ground floor, and it becomes a roof standing on that perimeter, on that fence, but with the same plan. As you can see, this is the plan of the first floor, and with the same plan, but only it has a facade around, looking actually to the fields in front and to the forest in the back, not towards its neighbors. And it just repeats the openings in the walls of the rooms every time. And of course, it gives 2 very distinct universes to live in, although the rooms just are repeated and just filled in, let's say, according to how we live in a house, by furniture, by elements of life, by just things to live with. Even a bathtub could become a piece of furniture. And what was very important with this house also is that we design it from the inside. It's something we do a lot with our project. So this shows details where we show the windows, how they're treated and hang on the perimeter on the outside, and we have very big sliding windows that make it possible to close off one of these rooms on the ground floor. And as you can see, this kind of thing, they are ultimately brought into detail and take the consequence of this kind of thinking in concept, but also in detail in architecture.
So this house which David describes, and as David was introducing, we try to always show double projects in some sense. It has its double in this house, which is even built not so far away from the first one. It's about 15 kilometers away. You could say very similar context on the one hand and quite different on the other hand. You see all of a sudden the area is a little bit more urbanized. Where the white cutout is here is where these people who approached us wanted this house to be built. And in fact, when we visited the site, there was already a house, the house with many extensions. Actually, that was the existing house, the first one. There were many extensions in the back. Very, not a very particular, not a very beautiful place. And we were even more intrigued because they told us they would like to make a weekend house there. And I have to say, Belgium is not very beautiful, but that place is even worse. So we were totally shocked. We thought you never want to do that. But in some strange way, the fact that they insisted and they came back to us and they said, no, we want a house and it even needs to have a little pool or something. You can do whatever you want with all this stuff which is in the back of the house. We want to keep the front house. So we thought, is there a device, is there a way to, and if you go back to the very first cutout, is there a way to build a house there that somehow manages to flip hierarchy? So is there a building, somehow a sequence of spaces, very similar to the house David just described in some sense, which, because it's there, it makes you forget the house which is in front of it. So from that perspective, and this was one of the early collages we made, I mean, as you can see, almost like a ready-made with some existing elements, we thought, is it possible to make a house with so much interior that you completely forget where you are? So for that reason, we kind of realized that we could make 4 same-size rooms, 9 by 9 meter. The house David just explained is a house of 4.5 by 4.5 meter rooms, so in a way, a quarter of this size. And these big rooms were either outside, the first one and the fourth one, you could say, or inside or semi-inside the 2 middle ones. So very similar again in plan of the building before, but sometimes also, and I think the section is after this, the first room will be somehow inside and the second outside and the third inside again and outside. So, I mean, there's certain ambiguity, very apt, we thought, within that thought of building a building which totally escapes its own context. Very ambiguous about what the actual climate and what the actual specificity of the interior is. So here you see the front house and you see the new house. The new house here seen from the front house is in a way nothing more than a sequence of 4 big rooms. And here now the roof is in front of the first space, and the space with the pool is now open, I mean, say, when the weather allows. And you see that in some sense the house fills the whole site. So as opposed to the first building, here the borders are completely taken and everything is somehow ambiguously either garden wall or building wall. So that's how you approach the house. There's a kind of single brick wall, which then, and I should say something about the single brick wall, which then when you enter is in a way a white painted wall with typically a steel truss on top of it. So if you go back to, in a way, the section or the plan, you see that actually the rooms are made by these single brick walls. So there's like 4 rooms, always with a single brick wall. And then when the rooms touch each other, there's like a double wall with a certain thickness. The sliding window goes in between, and there's like a double door, which makes access, of course, added to what the sliding doors already do, to each of the rooms. So literally a set of interiors glued against each other. So the moment you kind of see the last one, in the front or in the back, you see that single brick wall not treated, because of course the only thing we're really interested is the interior itself. So you go back to that sequence and you see that. You see the way you approach, in a way, the unfinished outside wall, which to a certain extent we ignored. And you go to the first room inside and you see then that house, the existing house, which became kind of a servant house to this weekend house. So here you go through a sequence of the spaces. In the plan, you could see that actually the only bathroom in the house we put in this kind of greenhouse-like space with the pool, which now here is open. And inside the big space, I mean, actually here you see that, right? You see the double wall and you see the bricks. And of course, you might think this is extremely specific, but it's exactly this specificity, the height of the wall, which is 2.70 meters, this steel kind of beams on top of it, which somehow make a corniche, but also make a rail for the roof to move, also make somehow a rail for the glass to be open or closed. I mean, it's these very specific details which, in our opinion, as you can see them here, make the house performing that way. So there's, of course, this ambiguity about what these elements really do. In some moments, the beam is really functional, and in some other moments, it's there to complete, in a way, the architecture. So here, in one of these rooms, as you can see, I mean, the most closed room, in a way, the roof has the same detailing as the movable roof, but it's just fixed and closed. It's a very simple element made out of leather on the inside and kind of very thin, kind of a Polish pine wood, kind of a plywood, which organizes the space. For us, interestingly so, in the sense that it's exactly these different sizes of spaces, although they're always the same, which forces into these kind of different solutions. And then ultimately, and I believe it's more or less the last image or the last sequence, you see that what we thought ourselves was totally impossible, that you could actually build an escape space in the middle of this kind of mess, turned out to be a reality. I mean, cutting away roughly 3 meters from the existing context beautifies that what immediately surrounds you.
Second duo. This is also a project in Belgium, and what we look at is an aerial picture of how are they called? Tree growers. There's a word for that. Pépinière in French.
I don't know the word here.
Yeah.
It's like a company which makes.
They grow tree and transport them all over the world, actually, and it's one of the biggest nursery. That's the word, tree nursery. So it's in Belgium and actually in Europe, it's one of the biggest one. And this is an area where the trees are in pots and making a certain urbanism on themselves as different kinds of trees, ready to be transported. And here we were asked to make a very big box. It's been said already, but a big box. An industrial building, a building for trees. So a big box for trees. And this Edouard painting, of course, I mean, you all know it, but it's something that interests us. How can you make an industrial building? They're built everywhere, but how can you make it interesting? And this question of to make a box for trees, to dry actually trees, to just dry them before they're transported was for us this challenge, and a box that would stand in the middle of this urbanism of different kinds of trees. So it's almost like a city plan with city blocks, but they're made by trees. And then in the middle of that, there would be this gigantic hall covering trees for a few days to dry them to be transported. And this is our take on it. In a way, it shows perspectives from different sides, and we were very intrigued, of course, by the master plan as such. And I can go back maybe quickly. You can see it has different angles from where the trees come, and we took that kind of plan with 2 straight angles, but obliquely made to each other, and as a kind of hinge moment of the urbanism, to be the plan of the hall itself. And the hall takes within itself the same urbanism of 3 blocks and just make a gigantic span. Because for us, then the challenge was, how can you make an interesting industrial building? Maybe it's about just 2 things. It's about making its structure and its skin. And its structure is a very big span at some points, smaller at other points. The height changes because it's just a sloping roof which allows the rain to run off. But at the same time, these trees needed to be dried, so the hall didn't need any isolation. So it needed actually ventilation, and this is a collage we made which showed the ambition of the hall. Two things, it's just structure and skin. This is a picture in the office where you can see a kind of a material we found, which is almost a standard corrugated steel plate, which does exist standardized in a perforated version. It's used mostly for isolation purposes, acoustic isolation in big span industrial buildings. But we found it really beautiful, and we thought, could we not apply it as being the actual skin of the building on the structure? And because of the wave of the corrugated steel, we could actually just use it as such immediately on the primary beam and column structure. And in the end, it gives a very big building, a very big box, but with this extreme lightness to it also. So wind goes through it. The roof is not perforated, of course, but at the same time you can see the silhouettes of trees that are stored in there to dry as being part of the same plant scheme all around. And in the end, it's just a very simple way of how to make doors in such a skin. So all details there became very important, or how to make a roof edge, which we didn't make in the end, we just cut it like with scissors. And it gives this. And from within, it's even more transparent because the light outside is mostly very bright during the day. So you can look outside through these corrugated steel plates. And every door makes a frame to hold the same corrugated steel plates. And gigantic doors to bring in these trees. These are 9 meter high. And as the first collages showed, this was, again, all pictures are from Bas Prinsen. He took these when the building was finished, and somehow it's amazing how he can then just show it back to us in a very similar way. So this lightness of a box, which from different angles also has a very different performance or appearance or perspective even.
Well, the second duo perhaps is very much about trying to make architecture with almost nothing, whereas the first duo was very much focusing on our desire to design, especially then for houses, to design almost a house from inside out, like as a set of rooms. Like here, when the scale provides or forces you into it, or perhaps, as we will see here, where to a certain extent the context forces you into this. The architecture is almost invisible in the sense that it's that one detail David just showed of this corrugated steel, or as you can see here, a detail of a column and a steel curtain. Now, in that sense, both projects are deeply related. They're both, you could say, boxes of trees. So here we are in Sharjah, which is one of the Emirates next to the bay, in fact. And Sharjah has this art biennial they do every 2 years, as it is a biennial, of course. And they do that in what they call the heritage area. And as you can see, it's hard to find it, that heritage area. There's a little bit there, and there's a little bit there, and then somehow urbanism of the last 30 years kind of has eaten as much as they could. And when Yuko Hasegawa, who co-curated with Sejima the 2010 biennial, invited us in Venice, invited us here in Sharjah about 2 years ago to get involved in what was essentially an art biennial. She first asked us whether we did not want to make a master plan of this art biennial, because she thought you could only show this art in something of like a sublimation, you could say, of this perhaps projection, this kind of dream of the Arabic court and the Arabic kind of maze. And well, we made a master plan, and this is not a master plan. This is what in a way was left for us then to do, But the master plan essentially was trying to densify in that what is still left of the heritage area as much of the space as we could, so that somehow, at least for this period of time during the biennial, you experienced the urban tissue in a very different way. Now we ourselves, we thought that what we could contribute was to introduce these 3 wide squares in a way as 3 gardens. And why 3 gardens? Of course, it's very difficult to project on a very different context an idea of what's public space, and we were also very reluctant to do so. At the same time, we were extremely fascinated by this image, which is an image from Dubai in the 1950s still, where you see this very peculiar perimeters on actually the banks, where, or let's say on the shore, which were built out of arish, which is this dried palm leaf. And as you can see them somehow also here. So there's still a little bit of this left, but it somehow disappeared. At the same time, we are not, I mean, in our practice, we are not interested in totally reintroducing this old technique, but rather to try to kind of translate that, to kind of, you could say, to take that into, well, 21st century and to understand what you could do with it. So here again, you see these 3 spaces, perhaps here more clearly visible as an attempt to densify the existing fabric. And we thought, can we make these spaces in a way as an attempt to introduce something like a microscopic park of 24 by 24 meter 3 times, and at the same time using as a technique to make that park a kind of very technological version of this filtering or the filtered effect of the Paris perimeter. So in a way, the palm leaves here being not the dead part, but the lively part. Here you see them, the palm trees, these black dots in the middle, and the perimeter being somehow this curtain as an answer of this arish. So here you see the 3 projects, each of them in a way carefully chosen as to make a much more densified area around the entrances of the existing mosque building, not a peculiar building, but somehow totally lost in space currently. Another one, trying to reorganize here what is left and awkwardly left of the heritage area. And the third one actually there where the main buildings of the biennial were. So here you see the detail, and the detail is in that sense somehow a brother of the project David just explained. It's a column, it's a beam, it's a round column in this case, it's a kind of U-profile beam which carries the lights and which is always horizontal. It's a 3-meter high steel curtain. The floor is never always the same height, so somehow this very silly detail becomes the architecture of the project. And then it's the curtain itself, which is made out of this kind of steel mesh. Then the decision to, in a way, take away all the paving every time when we kind of, put that curtain, make it into a very small park or a garden, and then plant these palm trees. So here you see that. You see the detail of the top and the curtain, and here you see a set of pictures. So as a result, you had this, in a way, very simple project, almost, you could say, May 68 idea of sous le pavé, la plage. And this kind of course, cultivated space, because of course it needs water cultivation, otherwise these trees die in like 3 days, was an attempt to introduce a green spot in an area which does not have it at all. There's even this little water well, as you can see here. But not as a kind of European idea of a big park. I mean, because of this curtain, it is extremely private. So it was very successful exactly because of its privacy. I mean, in some ways, it kind of could negotiate the desire to be in such a space, but not to have to share, that exchange with many people at the same time in an enormous open green park-like spot. So here you see actually a set of pictures going from the first pavilion, garden pavilion, to the second one, where always there was a concrete element of a different size, going from a very small size, which is the water well, to a much bigger size, which actually made only this part accessible in the second pavilion, to the third one, which was actually at the entrance of the Biennale, which worked somehow as a place for, there were all different type of events, and there was something like a tea bar that you can see here. I mean, there obviously that guy is not exactly enjoying, I think, the space. He's cleaning it up.
This third group is so we had the boxes with trees. I would say this group, they're projects with columns. In some strange way, we stay in the Middle East, and this is an aerial view of Muharraq in Bahrain. It's a very old part of a town in Bahrain, where you have the real Arabic tissue still, let's say, how it was, and it just grew, buildings are replaced, but the original tissue is there. And actually, we were asked by the Ministry of Culture to think about existing buildings in that tissue, existing buildings that have a certain name. They're called dar, which is the Arabic word for house. And dar, in this case, they're also used for the playing of traditional music. It's actually pearl divers who used to play this music, and this tradition is still alive and being, as you can see, still performed in old houses. And it's about percussion, it's about singing, clapping, with different very basic instruments. So a very beautiful tradition, and actually it's kind of vanishing. And when we were asked to make something, to make, let's say, an idea of how could we make that tradition not only stay alive, let's say, but also to make it visible somehow in the city, we designed two projects, because they asked us to build actually, or to design two projects for two different locations. Two projects that we approached in a very similar way. One is standing exactly in this dense tissue as you saw before, and this is a collage of it. And it stands next to the old building, but it is a new building, of course. It's a new building in the sense that it just embraces the fact that you can build higher today. These are not mud buildings anymore, it's concrete buildings. And we like the fact that you could somehow make almost like a Le Corbusier's domino, 3 floors of concrete and with columns, and make that as a type exist in correlation with the existing types, which are actually only buildings of rooms. And you can see here the plan of the bigger extension of the existing dar in the main very dense tissue. And we made also in another location, this is Rifa in Bahrain, a similar situation. The building is slightly older, the existing. We made also an extension there, but the tissue, as you can see, is almost gone, but still there also a similar annex, you could say. And we were very intrigued by how these lower existing buildings could, let's say, relate to the new extensions they needed. And what here you can see the one in the denser tissue, and again the one relating, here you have already a new building, also 3-4 stories high, the existing, very old, which is actually only 100 years, but there it's quite old. And then again, the new building. And as these buildings, the existing, have almost as what we really like to make, a courtyard with rooms, very simple rooms surrounding it. We thought, how could you add a type to that? And this is a section through such a building, the extension, which is just actually 3 floors of 3 rooms, you could say, all composed on slabs of concrete, and then in the end, almost like little temples surrounded by columns that carry each of the floors. And you see the floor sticks a bit out, so you can also somehow make a strange silhouette with the building. And this silhouette was for us very important because, in a way, the idea of such an open structure in concrete could be countered, and it's almost as the mesh that Kersten was showing in the project in Sharjah. We were, of course, influenced by that, and we thought, could we make a building that actually has almost a garment, a piece of clothing around it that protects it and shields it, gives it intimacy, but at the same time, some transparency. And the plans are very simple. These are just rooms. This is a performance room on the ground floor, education room, and the same in the other one. But you can start to see that they form a new play in this existing mesh. This is the one in Muharraq. And they make little access possibilities. And at the same time, this is when you would take away the curtain or the mesh that has is seamlessly placed over the entire building, and you see the very basic and simple organization. A space that you use to circulate surrounding actually interior spaces that are used for different reasons. The same for the one in Rifa. And they're now being built. This is the one in Muharraq. You can see what we really wanted is to, with very basic means, to make just a column, a slab, and within that, you, as a frame, you could start thinking to live it. This is the rough construction. Today, it's been evolving, and this is our research for again, a mesh, in metal mesh, for the skin of these buildings. So what interests us is how could you make such a thing without panels, without, let's say, things that are repeated, but to consider it as a real piece of clothing. So without any joints. And we are now working with a company, actually a Bahraini company, who produces this mesh, and that can really, at the same time, also give us a certain way of almost making the small buildings in the tissue perform as little theater. So this is our tests for the ground floor, where there's cables integrated in the mesh that pull it up, and where you could, at some point, make it become part of the urban tissue, the whole, let's say, performance space which is behind it. And the whole, the question, or our research and our thinking with this mesh again is trying to negotiate, which is these massive buildings, with something new that is massive and at the same time is extremely light, almost as the drying hall in Belgium.
I go back one second to this project, not to pursue this project, of course, because David beautifully explained it. But what's interesting, perhaps, as a bridge to the one which comes after this, is that it's a project, of course, which is about that new building, but at the same time, it's also a project about the building which is just standing next to it. And for that reason, you could say it's a project which tries to negotiate a problem, especially in Bahrain, in the Middle East, which is one of heritage. Like, what on earth is heritage when buildings like the oldest one you saw is perhaps only 150 years old, and the other one is maybe 20 years old, but because of this very extreme climate, they're endlessly replastered, repainted. There's almost, the only thing you can keep is the idea of type. Now, this argument of keeping that building as a type, because they were actually originally commissioned to us as extensions of the building, but keeping the type, cleaning up the type, and then building that building next to it was a crucial thought for us. Of course, then translated into the two buildings you just saw. Now, exactly this thought, to a certain extent, came back here in a very different context. It's a house in Belgium, and this is, in a way, you could say an image we often use as a reference, where you could see the house as it was, as it exists, is a beautiful house, but it's not liked by the clients. It's a very, in a way, bourgeois house, which you could imagine is about 100 years old, but is actually built in the 1950s. And for that reason is in a way a building which we felt we could not destroy, but which the clients did not want to really be associated with. Now, for that reason, I mean, and of course there's the argument of the columns, but for that reason also this project is a very interesting brother of the building we just saw before. This beautiful drawing of Philip Gusten is interesting, of course, and I guess most of you know the fact that Gusten somehow in the late 60s, mid 70s, he all of a sudden moved away from what he was kind of known for at the time, which was a kind of abstract expressionist, a bit of an unresolved abstract expressionist, say, style. And he started to make these drawings which are somehow, and paintings, which were somehow figurative, but which were very confusing, very difficult to understand. And this one drawing, you could say, is at the same time two more or less abstract objects, one on top of the other, but also somehow an object on a pedestal, you could think of. And then, of course, if you know many of the paintings he was painting around the same period and drawings, it's also somehow the head of a Ku Klux Klan. So this kind of thought that something carries much more than the initial kind of indication of that what it carries, we feel is very important, as much in Bahrain as it is here in this house. So here again, the house we just explained, a house which in a way is very interesting but not very beautiful, or maybe very beautiful but not very interesting. To you the choice. It's probably never both. It was a house which had, and I don't think we have the picture here, which had like a base, somehow like a big bit of an arch here and a stair here. The stair went to this door, which was the main door, which was the entrance door of the house. Why was that? Because all the houses around it are built a bit higher, and somehow here you could kind of still park your car and you could store something. But essentially the rest of this was earth. So what you see here now was earth. Now, rather than kind of beautifying this house and transforming its looks and we don't know what, we decided simply to build in a way a pedestal for the existing house, pretty much in the logic of what I just tried to explain. So you could say that pedestal is our project, but of course the pedestal wouldn't exist without the house. So here you see that pedestal, and it's very much an experiment on the one hand in the logic of this set of rooms as a sequence, and how you can make a set of rooms as an almost totally interiorized idea of house. Also, you could argue that the house does not read any representation, because in fact that was already done before us. And at the same time, of course, it's also a thought, is it possible to design rooms not so much with walls, but almost like as if a wall would be a thick line, you kind of have a dotted line. So you kind of make rooms with dotted lines, as you can see here, all dotted lines everywhere. And then you kind of try to find out if that, and then choosing two different measurements, like say A, B, as you can see somehow all over the plan, is it possible? And so that thought, that experiment, and then of course doing that, because of course that's half of the story, but doing that within almost the echo of the logic, almost like as in a blueprint, you could say, of the existing house, you can see here on top. So that although everything is this kind of celebration of autonomy, like a pedestal would perhaps do, or like as an idea of a totally new house would do, at the same time, it is not autonomous at all, because the house on top kind of defines every single measurement of the thing below, and it's of course dug out, and there's an extreme, I would say, dishonesty. I think it's perhaps our most dishonest project we've ever designed. So it's dishonest up to also this point, and the project which David just explained, with the different columns, it had this kind of hidden story as well. I mean, the columns were concrete columns and sometimes steel columns, and the steel columns were having the ducts, and there were far too many columns, of course, in this dar, or this dur. And here you have a bit of a similar story. It's all concrete columns, but in fact, you can see here a picture during construction. Some of the concrete columns are more concrete than others, let's say. So here you see that in a plan. So in a way, the red ones are really, really concrete, and then the blue ones, in fact, are not. So it's of course it's a very simple line of insulation, you could say, because we wanted to have simple, in a way, glass between columns, and Le Corbusier could do that in La Tourette, but today it's impossible to do that. I mean, there's cold bridge issues and everything. But of course, we also thought that was the beauty of it. So you think that what you see here is a concrete column, but actually it's a steel column which is kind of clad by a wooden kind of mullion, which you can take off and in and out in a certain sense, so you can replace even the glass. But so the glass line is the blue line. But of course, since the glass line is not exactly where you imagine it, it's something which confuses you, so you never really realize. And at the same time, when you're close by, we don't hide it neither. So here you see that. You see the detail of the concrete columns, as you can see them here on the right. You see a few. Actually, there's also one there on the right, the very right, with kind of a nature stone infill, as you can see there. And then these kind of wooden columns, which are actually have this steel column core, which have either this window, this glass, or even a door, which is also the only parts which can open, the doors and the ventilation panels. And we decided to put that all together exactly to keep the glass as confusing as possible. So here you have actually the garage, and you never see it unless you hide yourself in the garage and wait until the light switches off. And then here you see the garage from the main salon. And maybe I should at least explain you for a second in the plan what is what a little bit. So you enter the house actually here after you walked under it. There's like in a way only room where you put some furniture in between the columns, so it makes that separation. You have a salon and a set of other rooms, outside room, and here kind of a garage. But of course these rooms, they have names, and at the same time they don't have much of specific function. Now, within this, and to a certain extent in that tradition, I mean, you could say even of a Roman house, it's only by changing the material of the floor, but making family. So here you have this concrete, which has this kind of brownish effect, in a way just by adding a little bit of color to the concrete before it dries. Here you all of a sudden have an extremely expensive floor, which is this leather. It's a leather floor, but somehow it looks almost like plastic. So in a very strange way, you don't necessarily always judge its exact value. So here you have this you have leather floor again, you have the concrete floor, and you have these panels which are in a way Polish pine stained green. And so, you know, it's all this, like, and for example, in the story of concrete and wood, so this is wood and that's concrete. And if you look at the one before, actually what you're looking at in front of you is all wood, and on the left is concrete, but then which is the frame of the nature stone is again then concrete. So it's very difficult. Here you have the steel doors, and of course perhaps the extreme abundance of materials confuse you so much about the materiality that you forget to look at the columns themselves. So here you see a door on the right with a little light, actually a ventilation panel and all the switches, because in order to get you very focused on the columns as they simply are, we did not, of course, add any of these to the columns proper. So here you see that. You see, you kind of, you look into one of these living room spaces towards the slope of the garden, because the house was literally kept up, then dug out, then the pedestal was pushed under it, you could say, built under it, and then, of course, the garden kind of continues. So here you see that. So you see, in many ways, this project is about negotiating the edge of your own architecture. Like the dars which David was explaining, these dars, or these dur, which is apparently the plural of dars, but these dur, they have their autonomy, but at the same time, in their autonomy, they negotiate this very narrow space. And here also the autonomy of that new, in a way, intervention comes up to the point of cutting the staircase and leaving it there and putting a railing on top, which is the same inside here as the railing. You see it here again, outside, as if this pedestal is an object totally on its own. So that's that negotiation, which you could say is an expression of pure respect of the house that it exists, but at the same time is, of course, also one of total ignorance, as you can see.
Belgium again. We're in Leuven, in a city near Brussels, and we won a competition for a school where children from, let's say, 12 to 18 go to learn gardening and agriculture. And so it's a beautiful site. It's a site where you can, at the edge of Leuven, where the old city wall was, where now the ring road is. And at that edge, it's also a very high spot on a hill overlooking the city. And it used to be old vines, let's say, that grew on this hill, because it's on the south also. But it gradually became actually the gardens, the actual gardens for the gardening lessons of the school, with even glass houses and patches of gardening, and kind of a beautiful carpet of different ways of teaching agriculture and gardening. And when we were asked to make a new building there, we were so amazed by this beauty of this patchwork that actually the site that you can see in the middle was awkwardly, strangely cutting the logic of that. And we put the building in the same logic as the fields. We thought that would be very clear, although it didn't follow the logic of the road that the other ones did. And somehow that very simple act or gesture made the plan of the building. The building, which is actually not only an agriculture school with just classes basically, but also has a big gymnasium. And a gymnasium in this space, in this project, this is a reference project we bought very light. It's a project by Alejandro de la Sota in Madrid for a school / gymnasium. And here de la Sota made this playground, because there was a huge height difference between the, let's say, two roads on top of the school, having classrooms on top there and the gymnasium under it. And somehow that section inspired us to make this. It's actually a building composed out of two buildings, you could say. A normal classroom building and a kind of a big box containing the gymnasium, but also somehow resolving quite a big level difference in the terrain at the street side and the side of the fields. And so by just combining these tools, we managed to put the playground on top of the gymnasium. This old fascination we had, we could really do it, and then at the same time negotiate that with the main building of classrooms. And these were images we made, and it would be a building it's a school, so it has its certain presence, its certain massivity, but at the same time it had this relation with as well the gymnasium as the city it was looking at. And the fields, of course, it was immediately related with. And this is the first collages we made from that building, with a very simple plan, as I explained, the triangles around it that somehow occurred by twisting the plan. It gave us different slopes that could resolve all accessibility around the building, going down, going up to the playgrounds. The fact that we switched the school from, let's say, street, not the main building, but the playground, to the street, and then suddenly opening it up, making a covered playground as a kind of window to the city. All this in the mix gave us a plan that could just be these two simple buildings, so the gymnasium, the stairs, and in its section it had to solve all these different heights, so we made one big set of stairs that could solve that, could become, let's say, the system of how to go above or below the ground, and become also actually a facade of a building towards the city. That building was built in a very basic way. There was not a lot of budget, so we chose a system of concrete walls that were prefabricated, but that we used as a kind of composition to put in this facade, in which this is a facade that is actually visible in the gymnasium space, so where the stairs are. But here, what we really liked was a kind of almost like a decor that were rising in the beginning of the building site. Oh, just like a cowboy facade in a saloon somewhere, and this line being almost cut through the entire project explains also how these two buildings collaborate, and finally, of course, become one. And that's also made by its main perimeter, finally, as being a set of windows, copied all around. Here, windows looking really deep in the gymnasium space. On top, the playground. As a main hinge, you could say, the school negotiates these lower playgrounds with its almost Belvedere-like playground with a window to the city, and the same windows in the stair that acts as a vertical element in negotiating these two projects. And it's a very simple building, so we didn't really put a lot of, let's say, excessive materials, but we managed to build it with this concrete walls, and finally, by adding just what we actually need for a school, we managed to make it into what it actually is today, a fully working school. And it's amazing how the relation with these fields happens. And actually, through this is an intervention of an artist in this Belvedere space overlooking the city, through bizarre moments that you can find, like this one. It's a tree he took, and then mirroring plates. It's an artist we work a lot with, Richard Venlet, and this is a view from the gardens that weren't yet planted. But as you can see, this hole in the building, looking at the city, at the same time a very simple set of windows, providing daylight in the classrooms, and a picture of Bas. Again, almost showing back to us the collage we once made of it.
Well, of course, because we still have another double after this, and you got probably very tired. So I go very quickly through this project. We thought it was important, though, to show these two, because I think they very much indicate our current practice in trying to make with almost nothing, say, kind of economy of means. It's been used by us a few times before, an idea of a public building, and always trying to find that, that moment of performance in a few very simple gestures, where then, of course, in a way, the architecture tries to get the consequence of that. So where perhaps this big wall mediating between the sports hall, the playground, and the school building itself was very much our focus on the school. Here in this crematorium, a competition we won about a year and a half ago, in which we're now actually developing its definitive design, so soon start to build, we hope. So this building, in a way, is very, very related again, in the sense that there, the weapon of choice is this understanding that in a building of a crematorium today, and in Europe now, very quickly there's these programs of building these buildings. Of course, in a way, they're very peculiar machine-like buildings, because of course the idea of burning a dead body is the core of that building. At the same time, they're buildings which are supposed to replace very specific religious buildings. The idea of going to church to say goodbye to your beloved one, all of a sudden happens, and in extreme fast speed now. The percentages are enormous, like 40-50% already in Belgium in such a building, in a crematorium. And of course, since there's a kind of in-between situation where we are now, that is that people have a service in a church in some cases, and then the body is brought with these specific cars in the crematorium where actually the body is interred into ashes. At the same time, of course, it also has this very specific moment of representation. And often these things happen more or less in the same time. So again, like in a school, the school David just explained, in a way an extremely difficult program with a lot of pitfalls, which we felt we had to counter with one simple device, this very big roof, as you can see here. The roof is, I think, 50 by 50 meter roof with these columns, as you can see. You can see it here in a landscape design by Bas Smets, a landscape designer we often work with. And that roof, in a way, trying to find a combination of pure pragmatism, like a roof higher there where necessary, lower there where maybe intimacy is important, bigger than even to a certain extent necessary, so you could really see it from many angles, and inclined also in order to make, and you can see that somehow here, but I think there's another perspective, Sunya here, you could say as a natuurmort, like a still life. So we thought, is it possible, and here again we work together with Richard Venlet, the artist we just mentioned before, is it possible to turn this specific roof as a fifth facade, of course, but also as the place where somehow, through the combination of elements on it, something is said, as unclear as that might be. At the same time, of course, it's a place where you have to organize the chimney of where the cremation happens and so forth. But this chimney cannot be seen. I mean, that of course changes from country to country, but in Belgium it's absolutely unacceptable that you would see a chimney of such a building. So you have a set of elements which are extremely ambiguous in what they are. An element for getting light, a very specific punctuation, a chimney you could say. Since you only perceive the totality of it, and you don't avoid the problem, but actually use it in your advantage. The wall system, as David was explaining before, this kind of specific, very cheap prefabricated wall system, we also imply here. So you have a very simple building with a set of parallel walls which follow to a certain extent the logic of the landscape plan of Bas Smets, in which you have a specific plan with two halls which could function simultaneously with a way of entering and leaving. You actually enter towards the center and you leave towards kind of the sides. And at the same time somehow hiding, say, almost half of its program, which is accessible directly by these cars, as you can see here, and which is these machines, which are of course the core of what this building is about. So here you see that, like you say, a big box as a public building, where actually in each moment this height difference is used to its own advantage. So here you see it again. I mean, these are the perspectives of the competition. We are now kind of, developing this also with Richard. So in a sense, you could say there's almost nothing approach to architecture. These walls are the same concrete as you saw before, but it's the infill, the lights, the specific openings, in a way the piece of furniture which make it particular. So here you see that again. So I think it's the last image. It's an attempt to, you could say, to try to find in buildings at the one hand super complex, but then somehow because of its demands, the financial context in which you operate, which remain strangely simple. So simple that you could say only the perimeter, the big square is what counts.
And so this simplicity is of course something you've been noticing all the time, I hope, but at the same time comes back in a new category, which I would even dare to call large perimeters or big perimeters. The first project, it's actually been mentioned by Amale in the introduction. We were asked to work together with Christian Bourdet on a house project which is kind of peculiar. He bought an enormous area in Spain, near Barcelona, but not at the seaside, kind of a mountainous area, very beautiful, just next to a natural park. And there, in this immense terrain, he will build 10 houses by 10 different architects that he chooses in the world, so everywhere, from the US, India, Japan, Belgium, so that were we. So he asked us to build a house, and actually the question is very simple. It's a secondary house, a holiday house. There's no client. He's the client, or actually he says, you get actually carte blanche. You can do what you want. Think of what would be your dream house, almost, in that context. And he took us there and gave us this site, actually, exactly this site. So we walked on this little road, which is a dirt road. The site is, the entire terrain is quite far away from, let's say, houses are very far away. There's not so much villages even, and so it's wilderness. And we came to the spot. You can see with the circle. It's a plateau, which you don't see on the aerial picture, but kind of a flat plateau in the middle of a beautiful nature. And Kersten and I, when we were there, we're just amazed, first of all, by how beautiful it is. And at the same time, we felt a bit lost on this gigantic plateau overlooking the nature, what to do there. So we were walking all the time on the edge of this plateau, looking at the views all around. A bit bothered by the emptiness of the middle, and this, maybe this walk was I mean, it was fundamental. It became the house, because this circle is actually the design of the house. This is the perimeter, the big line we walked almost, but in an abstract way. And this is a picture that Bas Prinsen was sending us as when he saw the plans. He said, "Hey, look, this is really like your house." And well, I'll show the house. This is again a plan where you see more or less the height lines around it, and how this circle embraces actually the entire plateau, the higher part on which our site was situated. And the circle, it's 45 meter wide as a diameter, and 4.5 meter wide as a ring, let's say. It's a roof with a circle and a square inside as a plan. The square is actually rows of columns that hold up the roof and form at the same time 4 different, let's say, units that in its combination become the entire plan of the house, where you could say that some part, this court is let's say the living room areas, some bedroom areas, some study and bedroom areas, and even an entire open house that is near the pool, which is part of the landscape, and it's a pool house. Huh? In its section, very simply, you can see the drop of the terrain, but in the middle it's flat. It embraces really this plateau and makes just a datum there, and creates this kind of ambiguity between, let's say, what is nature outside the house and what is nature inside the house. It belongs suddenly to you, but it is exactly the same as the one outside. And at some point, just negotiating this edge of the plateau is become like our, let's say, design method of seeing how to see a house there. These were first collages we made. And of course, it seems as a gigantic house, but in the end, if you would count the real square meters it makes, it's a house of, I think, 200, almost 300 square meters, which isn't exaggerated. It's just actually a big roof that makes a perimeter around the space. And as I was explaining, the columns, which are steel columns, just carry an enormous disc or ring in concrete and also contain the actual facades that are in glass. So the straight line is entirely in glass. And there's a second facade that makes the curve, which is a very lightweight facade in polycarbonate, and which can actually roll open. So you could roll away this entire house facade to the other side and open up the whole living room. And also very important in the plan is this rhythm of columns on which we attach all the devices, let's say, of living. So you have a kitchen immediately attached to the column. There's this cupboard standing there. Even a bathtub could just be attached, because we see them as the only architecture really on which we can still attach these elements. So all the switches are also on that. And also because each of the houses they will be built in this area are fully autonomous. So they need to provide their own energy, dig their own water, make their own heat. And so we have this kind of collection of technical devices to be able to do that. So there's, of course, photovoltaic cells, water reservoirs, batteries, generators, and so on. And somehow this technicality of the project, this bizarre side of being autonomous in wilderness, we like that, and so we expose that. We almost make a kind of show out of that on top of the roof. So you have, as you can see here in New York City, all the water towers somehow. These we saw, or as the sculptures on Unité d'Habitation de Le Corbusier. It's almost a very strange sculpture standing on top of that roof, showing this technical level of what is living in that site. And here you can see from far away actually already the crane and our roof and the views, which are amazing. And this was in the beginning of the building site. When we came there, we needed to put let's say out the lines where we wanted to have the columns, or real orientation of the house. But when we arrived, it was really funny, because as if they made a road. It was 4 meters wide or 5, and you felt it's like a road making a little circle, the same circle we were walking at the time when it wasn't yet prepared. And just marking that house there was something very peculiar. Finally, it just became north, east, south, west. The facades, very simple orientation, but it seemed to be the best one. And these are the steel facades carrying actually concrete roof, which you can see here being poured already. With a pool that actually is partially made by the house as a retaining wall, and partially by the nature of the plateau. So it's almost a natural pool that leans towards the house. And this is the pool house, actually, so it stays, as you can see it today now. This will be only added some pieces of furniture, because it's the open house. So there's no glass, no polycarbonate facade that makes the curve. It is how it is, as you can see it. And this is when you actually come from, let's say, that little dirt road to access, and the square being a bit larger than the actual circle, it gives the open corners at each time, which show and have these windows towards, which is the nature. And this is actually the space for 2 bedrooms. That will be just made by some very simple furniture standing on these columns. Some cupboards, some bathtubs. It's supposed to be ready for, I would say, New Year, I hope.
So the last project we wanted to share with you is, I mean, of course, and as you understood, all these kind of associations are totally arbitrary, because we could make other couples and whatever. But in some way, we thought it was interesting to bring them together, maybe because of their so the extreme difference in their scale, but on the other hand, in how, to a certain extent, they deal with something quite similar, which is, as David was explaining, the thought of being about maximizing something like a perimeter, where maybe in the solo house, you have, of course, we never exactly walk like a circle, that would have been absurd, but I mean, you have this idea of almost a geometrical interpretation of that border, that circle, which we somehow discovered while being there. Here, this RTS building, which is a radio and television building for the French-speaking part of Switzerland, actually, and then even half of it, because this is for Lausanne, on the campus of the EPFL. You see that actually the site which is the site of our building has this kind of strange shape of something like an ear. I mean, it of course does not really look like an ear, but somehow we didn't even realize we drew an ear, but then all of a sudden there was this ear. So yeah. At the same time, as you can see also, it's as with the project of Solo House, we are very interested in how you could say one geometry and in combination with another one somehow works one as a correction on the other. And so here you see that ear, let's say, has this kind of rectangular cutouts, and perhaps exactly in this fashion. I think it's, of course, an artist you guys are all extremely familiar with. It's John Baldessari's. I think it's something like What Happened with the Square, or it had a kind of another silly title, but somehow also very funny. Where, of course, as with many other works, he almost literally kind of masks what really happened by cutting out this square, which is not exactly a square actually, if you would start to analyze it. And this idea that very act of cutting out this square and this particular, you could say, far more complex event, kind of creates a specific, a very different condition, you could say, is, I would say, very much the lead thought in this RTS project. Of course, there's many other thoughts. And when you do a presentation, you always have to somehow simplify what you would like to say. If I give a little bit of context, so this is a whole campus here of EPFL, which is this École Polytechnique in Lausanne, which I guess today is most known for that building here, the Learning Center by Sana, you see here from the top, and which had a competition a few years ago, which created this peculiar building now under construction called Under One Roof. And then this competition here for quite a different program, a different project, because it is a building for radio and television on campus. So in a way, it's even for another client on this site. So you have a very interesting situation. So there's a client, there's people who, and we were lucky to win this competition. In a way, we were by far the youngest team. But so there's a client who wants to make his own building, but has negotiated to be somewhere where he doesn't exactly belong. So that's a very interesting problem. So on the one hand, being there forces the radio and television somehow to give to the campus something. And as we all know, this learning center building is well known exactly for its kind of folded kind of surface. So for the fact, or at least I would dare to say the promise or the hallucination perhaps, that people would be able to hang out everywhere on beanbags, and for some reason then kind of interact with each other. At the same time, of course, this whole landscape, as you can see here, as it belongs to the campus, has to be something which even after the building is there, at least that's how we felt it had to, still is also campus. So for that reason, we made a very simple project. We made a building, on the one hand, with that ear, as I explained before. This is a kind of, you could say, a continuous space for work, redactions of radio and television, kind of fictional non-stop city with endless interior. And that being carried by these four, what we call in French, émergences, somehow an elegant word to say something is higher than a box, but not really a tower. And these kind of boxes, they work in a way as pylons, you could say, to carry that building. As the arc pylons, they free the space below. They indeed take almost the whole site. I mean, as David was somehow announcing before, I mean, that kind of ear. But at the same time, they organize sometimes extremely utilitarian, extremely big size kind of activities, like big trucks for recording and delivery and all that kind of stuff, which drive in and out closer to the bigger boxes, which are literally big boxes for studios, like the very big one on the right and the one here for the radio. And also they make space for kind of, you could say, cars of the radio television, almost like intervention cars of the fire brigade, you know, which are parked there and then drive off. And they make space more, say, towards what is the real campus for a mediatek address, a restaurant, which is in a way part of the campus, and a whole set of kind of covered spaces, which really try to make kind of usable space in direct relation to campus life. So here, of course, you could say the two, kind of, to a certain extent, extremely evident references, but for us also somehow very valid. An idea of a space which is totally interior and is possible because it's lit from above. And somehow, because how would you, that's the fascinating thing about this drawing, right? I mean, it's always shown as a square, because of course it suggests that it's forever. And so we thought, okay, let's cut off somehow the edge of the site. And that's the closest to endless we can get. At the same time here, of course, Campo Marzio, I mean, in a way, a building with many buildings, as many buildings as you can, so that there's a certain sense of shared space in between. You could say an urbanism without really an urban plan. So here you could see kind of a, let's say, very literal translation of that in the zoom in on the plan. And here then, how the building actually looks like, or is about to look like, you know, on campus. So here you have the street which borders the campus. This is the kind of nasty building here, which kind of forced it into ear shape, because it's there, and so it goes. And then, of course, you have the learning center on the other side. If you get closer, you see, of course, that since these volumes carry the building becomes extremely technical. Very much like the building David just explained, the Solar House. I think it's increasingly an organization for us, whereas maybe the first group of buildings we showed was really, can you make a house as a set of rooms? Is a room a wall? I mean, what is a wall? What is an opening? And then you saw maybe in the buildings later, the halls became kind of columns, many columns with infill. I mean, in this last set of buildings, all of a sudden you start to see this, in a way, fascination for technology up to a point that, like in the Solar House, there's no wall left. There's only a column. There's machines hung on the column. I mean, like a bathroom or a toilet or a kitchen, which make separations. And here also, it's columns, it's blocks, and these blocks carry enormous, beams. These very big, what's the real word, girders or something, I think in English, I'm not sure. They kind of, they become the only architecture which you can really see. And then, the outer perimeter is in a way the consequence of that. So here you see that in section. So you have this big box and another big box which carries in a way, almost like a traditional kind of shedded kind of working space. 6 meters high, so you can have mezzanines here and there, and that's it. And here you see the top, I mean, the consequence of that in the facade of the building as such. Here you see, the technical project as developed by Bollingen and Grohmann with us. So in an odd way, you start to have these strange beams which are extremely logical. I mean, they go from one spot to the other spot, and they carry, the champ or the field of production, which is here. Here you see that field. You see also that, I mean, in this version, literally the totality of the span is the top, the shed is the beams, as you can see them here, like this very big Warren trusses, that's the word I was looking for, and then actually even the floor, which is hung with this kind of stretchers on this totality of the height which is needed to make it happen, let's say. So here you see that again. So here you see the ground floor which tries to mediate with the campus. And here you see how, of course, from the ground floor then these different addresses become the addresses of the building inside. So this roof, of course, protects also trucks and loading and unloading. And these boxes, as you see on the right, are indeed these very high spaces for recording. So this is how we are now currently developing the project. I think we both feel we were extremely lucky to have that chance, because of course it's, on the one hand, of course it's a big building which is exciting to do, but at the same time we felt it's also a building which brings together many thoughts, many ideas which we've been kind of working on in other projects, so where somehow they find their extreme consequence. So there's this aspect of the big box, being a quite autonomous project where in a way the perimeter is essential, but there's of course also this idea of these different types which all together make a building which is ultimately quite complex, but each of its ingredients is extremely simple. So here you see a few pictures, and we apologize for the messiness of them because they're from the presentation model somehow in a small show which was done when it was announced. But it gives you an idea of how something extremely simple at first starts to acquire a certain sense of complexity, which is ultimately a space where you take the ultimate consequence of any of these extremely simple choices.
I think just a last thing, what interests us a lot is this two little references, of course, at the one hand, but then structurally just connecting these boxes, making a plan, finally an endless field to work in, lit by the top and perforated by patios, at the same time organized by these big buildings. I mean, it's something that finally for us is I would say a new challenge in our office to be able to deal with such a scale of building, and as Kersten was saying, also the ear shape as such is maybe not even a problem, because the building is so big that the ear shape will never be seen except from the helicopter, which they have though in Switzerland. There's a lots of them. But okay, thank you.
It was far too long, perhaps. Okay.
Stay.
We're not going to talk again that long, don't worry.
Well, thank you, Kersten and David, for an incredible lecture. It was, I think, Kersten, you sort of gave a sense a little bit of this kind of evolution, and although you did group them in 5 categories of 2, I wanted to kind of just go over some words or things that seem to evolve the square, but actually really the grid or the frame, the 9-square grid, the 9-meter square strip of kind of difference. And the frame, both at the scale of the plan, but also the details and how you assemble kind of the structures and the emphasis on the detail and the framing. The material sensibility, which always seems to offset the simplicity of the shapes or the geometries. And for me, it's always represented by Martin van Severen's chair with the fur on top, this kind of play of contrasts, which I think gets completely exacerbated in that beautiful house where you just changed the base and kind of pushed that play to an extreme. The struggle with context, no context, all context, but context is always there, whether you're denying it in the first two houses or then kind of sort of echoing it or responding to it. I think context starts to become, is always really content and present. I'm surprised the garden cuts through, and I know it was one of the issues of San Rocco. But also the rural, there's a really interesting, maybe it's the projects that you've had a chance to work on. It's interesting that the most kind of urban projects you've had are in Bahrain, or where the kind of condition of urbanity is not as dense as one might think. So there's this kind of really interesting play with the rural and the garden. You mentioned type. There's kind of shadow idea, the kind of facades that are almost transparent but not quite, and the columns where the transparency moves inside with this kind of dotted line, this sort of interrupted line, which I thought was really interesting. The generic, of course, and then suddenly there's a kind of liberating moment. Triangles start to appear, where suddenly the inner structure starts to intersect, and you're forming these corners which are no longer squares but become triangles, and the triangles move on the facades of the school and really sort of, and also cut by the frame. But you always had the triangle with the wedge, right? The big box is not always flat. It's also often a wedge, and I remember we had that debate in one of the final reviews of a big box that wasn't a box because it was a wedge, and which are some of the really great debates you can have with these guys. Long argument about the box versus the wedge, and then the circle. The circle arrives, freedom, with the house, but it's a frame. It's a courtyard. It's not a fill circle. And I agree, the last building is quite surprising with its kind of additions of the voids are squares, but you adopt this kind of free form for the shape, and it's kind of slightly elevated, and a lot of the framing and the kind of play with the structure moves to the inside, and the kind of the garden is a kind of interior garden. That was kind of my notes about your trip. And what's next is my question. Or are you keeping everything? Are you leaving some things behind? Or it's quite an evolution in a way. I mean, it seems like you're at this moment of complexity suddenly. So.
Does it work like this? Yeah. I think it's an interesting question because that's one of the beautiful things of lectures, right? That you show things in a certain sequence, and you see things. Also for us, I think you see things. A simple answer would be that of course, I think if you show work of an office, you never show what you're actually doing. That's a funny thing. Huh? You always show work what you did like 6 months ago or something, or maybe a year ago, or much longer ago. And I think if you look at what happens at the moment in the office, it is surprisingly square. What happens at the moment in the office? So the square is not that yet in our office. But it's true that perhaps, and it's very difficult to point out where exactly it happened. Enrique
but you have the square at the end.
Yeah, of course. But Enrique Walker said something very beautiful about this in one text he wrote on our work. He talked about geometrical correction, and I think we felt very close to that sentence. And as long as there's a geometrical correction, it all feels right, and that's also with the ear, let's say, but that's also with the solo house, where I think it was for a long time circle, but we had no clue how to deal with that circle until the moment the square came back. and in a very odd way, our production is very often moving or developing like this. No, I mean it's you try to walk away from something, and it only lands when 2 or 3 things come together, and there's a certain consistency. And then very often we are ourselves surprised that a project carries an idea of a project of 5 years ago, and one of 7 years ago, and one of 2 years ago. And of course that's different now as 5 or 7 years ago, because there was no other work. So in a strange way, maybe not unlike how a writer writes, you write in the knowledge that all the other things has been written, so you're not naive anymore. So I think that changes. But in our formal interest, I think not so much changes.
Yeah, it's also something, I think it's, you could describe the work as being forms, huh? Square, circle, triangle, things like
Shapes.
that. Shape. Yeah, but I think, I mean, it's not dogmatic on that level. It doesn't start from the idea, let's make this kind of very Platonic forms. It's rather it's also we talked about a lot about simple things, right? But it's not minimalist. I think the main importance about how we work is how it somehow tries to define a certain essence on which life can somehow start to exist again, and these things are are simple forms, and we try to create them with a certain economy of means that finally gives or delivers these shapes, maybe, no? But it doesn't take them as being let's start with a circle or a square because we're dogmatically believing in that. Do you understand?
Yeah, no, and I didn't mean to reduce the work to
No,
primary.
But it's also important.
But there's a kind of, I think, commitment to, as you said, a kind of essential or fundamental approach to architecture. And I think you're one of those practices that wanted to go back to a kind of essential elements, and you can see, I mean, the way you constructed the lecture, there was this kind of build up towards a new complexity as a result of that search, and I think that was quite interesting. So I didn't mean to reduce, and I think that there are many other things, such as materiality or the kind of field or the garden, that get layered on top. So it's
if I can add to that, to both your comments, let's say. I think for us, somebody who's extremely important, and of course, I mean, we mentioned his name all the time, so perhaps for everybody it was extremely clear that he was so important, but is the photographer Bas Prinsen, in the sense that he, as a photographer, I mean, and there's plenty of photographers around in the world, so not all of them worked in the same way, but I mean, let's say we got to know how he works to a certain extent, very much one-to-one. I mean, the framing of a certain picture, and that's, I would say, he works very much in the tradition of Louis Balz. I think that's, I mean, I got to know Louis Balz at the time through him. And so the composition of the picture and the geometry of that composition is, to a certain extent, the main framework, the main lead to frame something which is utterly imprecise and messy and found in the names of, in the case of Balz, I mean, a trashy industrial development and so forth. And Bas made us look at our work in the same way. That is to say that on the one hand, and I think it's very, very important, you never show everything. Or in other words, you never resolve everything. We make a few perspectives, and that's the only thing we know about our projects. Everything we haven't made, we have no clue about. In the same way as when Bas takes a picture of something, you don't know really the place he took a picture of, because you don't know what was on the right side of the picture, on the left side of the picture, or in his back. And it's that idea of composing, in a way, an argument, but at the same time composing an architecture, that I think for us is extremely important. So this kind of geometrical simplification, to a certain extent, is a bit the same train of thought. So all the time you're looking for devices to deal in a way with a complex world. For that reason also, of course, it's true. I think we very much sympathize. Also, we have a couple of important, let's say, friends there. I mean, people of our generation, which we feel we are a little bit on the same track. We very much sympathize with the idea of going back to the idea like what is architecture, how does it perform, what's a wall, what's a window, what's a type. I mean, type is already confusing. The way Rossi uses type in his L'architettura della città is extremely confusing, and so forth. I mean, is there something like size? Is there something like scale? I mean, for example, the very two first projects we showed, I mean, in a way, 2 times an enfilade of rooms, 4 by 4, even says 4.5, actually it's 4 by 4, and the other one 9 by 9, and everything changes. Or the first project, 2 rooms, floors, 4 by 4, but one is in brick and the other one is in wood. So it's all this kind of very strange implicit performance, let's say, of something very simple as a decision. And we feel that's very, very related to how, say, a photographer like Bas looks at the world.
Let's open it up.
Thank you, Kersten, and thank you, David. I thought it was incredible. And just to continue your argument about, circles, squares, types, grids, ears, freeform. Yes, but what is, I think, the most incredible is that those elements and the rethinking about them is also leading to a different way to look at the problem that you're faced with. In other words, there is a form of reinvention of the problem, whether it's the drying the tree, the building to dry the trees or so. It's not simply resolving the problem, it's reinventing it, or for the crematorium. And so, in a way, that's what architects can really wish for, is to reformulate the program. I know for a fact, for example, that for the RTS building, the client had no idea what they wanted. And they certainly at the beginning didn't think they wanted what you did. But you reinvented the program and you reinvented you invented a concept that no one had thought about. And I think this is quite fascinating to see that this redefinition is somehow supported by the material games that you're playing, because you are, which we all like, because at least there is some architectural culture in that. But at the same time, I think the most important thing is redesigning the question, and you're doing it fantastically well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. We can go home now.
Question. Let's see. David Hockney, Louis Baltz, Baldessari, Ed Rocher. What's so special about LA?
Well, I mean, there's a simple and I think the most honest answer is that we somehow started our office by going there. In a sense that we did not really know LA before we went there somehow, but when we were there, we did not even know each other so well, but we somehow liked, I think, Los Angeles in the same way. And somehow we realized that, and of course Baldessari is not is an American artist, but say Hockney isn't, but even Baldessari is somehow very much also European artist, like Rocher is to a certain extent. We had the impression that that kind of European look to Los Angeles, which was like the way Europeans looked at the States, like through the independent group and so forth, was something which we shared. And then this sense of hedonism, the beautiful sky, the amazing beach, the desert, this kind of strange city which people still don't know whether they like it or not, but somehow exists because of the desert, we felt very close to. So I think that helped. And then, I mean, we came from Canada, that's true, from the from the CCA Abalos and Herreros thing, and they were important teachers for us, for both of us. And they were very fascinated by Rainer Banham, and then the Rainer Banham For Ecology's book with the Hockney painting on the cover was very important for them and became very important for us. And perhaps not for the same reason, but it's like these, these thoughts, these pictures, which stay in your mind and you appropriate them. We believe very much that a good cultural production is based on misunderstanding, and perhaps we misunderstand LA.
You must, definitely.
Hi. I would like to say that it was a pleasure to witness the moment in a continuous line that consists of all the dots in your previous life, in your that shows your heritage, maybe your predecessor 1,000 years ago. It's all your culture, your experiences, your who you are at this moment in such a subtle and emotional, very peaceful architectural form. And at this point, in my opinion, the world has achieved a point where technology and all the advances are at the point that, in my opinion, we have to try to comprehend where we're at and to maybe step back and rethink certain achievements. But it's just something that the architecture talks for it, your architecture and design talks for itself, and it's pleasure.
Well, thanks a lot. But maybe I want to say one thing, that is that we do not give lectures always together, and it's not necessarily an easy task to give them together, but we do like to give them together because I think it's the closest you get to a reconstruction of how we work together to a certain extent. And part of the way we work, and we feel that's very important, is that we never really discuss why we do things. We just at a certain point come to a point where we both feel confident with that what lays on the table, and that allows us to be ambiguous about what we do, because it's not, I would say, the architecture we do is not a sense of propaganda where you first have defined what architecture should be now or in the next 10 years, and then you kind of make projects which have to illustrate that. No, we believe, and we feel very related to, say Ed Rocher to a certain extent, that in the ambiguity of the cultural production, you are able to claim to a certain extent without consequence. And that's a very powerful device. And I mean, I don't know if I then kind of should use the opportunity, but in the end, we're speaking to students. And we think it's very important to realize that we are one of the very few places where you can do that. And so we should caress that opportunity. We should be realizing that as architects, we can be ambiguous. We can claim without consequence. We actually are needed in the world as cultural producers exactly for that reason.
Thanks, first of all, for the great talk, and I would be curious to hear more about the double as a form that maybe has something to do with what was just said. Also, to step back, because it seems to me, and I'm not an architect, but for the creation of space is like an important step. Very basically to have the double, but also to have what connects to, at least from what I know through the pictures I see of your work, but also what you say. I mean, there's this ambiguity inside, outside, static, non-static, weight, weightlessness. So the center is always empty in a way and open. You leave it open for most times. But the question would probably just be if you have references in architectural history, because from what I understand, you work a lot with as architects with the history also of architecture. You're very self-aware, even if you're you follow kind of certain idea of hedonism or you go against it, but still there's this rich history of architecture, and maybe there's something you can say more about the double in that, like Mies van der Rohe, I think, like there's a quote by him with like 2 bricks and then it's architecture, something, I don't know. I'm not familiar with this history, but I'd be very curious.
They are too.
Yeah, well, it's maybe also already that was what Kersten was saying, is to start with, it's really the two of us always. There's no real exceptions, making everything together. Of course, with an office, so there with our collaborators, but from the beginning it was already the two very different minds, let's say the one of Kersten and me, that somehow try to find or describe or or define what is for us architecture, and you never really can grab it in one gesture. So I think what we try with each of the projects is to describe that over and over, and that's working together. It's we both studied with Pablo Serreros, very strangely, also a certain mirror situation, also double, and at the same time, maybe what we believe in very heavily is the fact that you have to be able to define architecture in teaching, but also in a project which is on paper, but at the same time define it also as being something real, or to build it. And so the argument you make starts to become very important in how you then make further steps in materialization of a project. And all these things oscillate around what you call this empty heart or something. And I think it's bringing in from different angles all references from history, but also just very pragmatic building methods. And that's very, very important. I don't know whether that's a real answer to the fact of double, but each project has immediately a brother, you could say, or a sister, and then again a nephew, and so on. And so they all the time they're becoming a big family, but they all the time influence each other, that's for sure. And that's why, in a funny way, we made now today, and sometimes we do it more, these doubles, because it structures also our mind somehow.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Maybe one thing, one very small thing to add to that. We sometimes use as double or difficult double. We also sometimes, in other occasions, we talk about false friends. And false friends is in a way a clearer term to a certain extent, as it's used in linguistic for kind of words which look alike but have a very different meaning, right? So I think the English eventually and the French éventuellement is a very good example. I mean, it has a very different meaning. I mean, eventually is bound to happen, and éventuellement is quite probably not happening, you know. So this is this is the power also of things which seem similar. And I'm talking about the empty core, of course. Venturi's the difficult hole, in which he talks about the difficult double, is exactly talking about the center which is empty. So it's all this. But again, it's never one. It's many of these things at the same time.
It's also something that, in a way, you cannot describe, and so how the more you try, the less you really achieve. Maybe what Kersten was saying about the pictures of Bas is the best way to describe the projects, because there's a certain layeredness, and Amale was trying to also put that on words, but even adding a picture or an experience, every person sees that different, and that's very important, I think, in our work, that there it allows that there is not a fixed definition on how to interpret these projects. 2 questions.
Last question.
Hello, thank you for your lecture. I find very interesting the way how you represent your architecture. I want to know what is the role of collage in how you communicate your ideas.
Allow me to keep it quite short, in the sense that Bas Prinsen's take on the frame and the composition is very close to our take on the collage, in the sense that, as I said before, we decide consciously not to show everything, and so not to design everything at first, to kind of have a set of views, as opposed, you could say, to making a 3D render of a project where you then kind of walk around and put a camera and then look what you would like to show. We, in a way, construct these perspectives. So in a way, we construct the building while constructing the perspectives. So it's the other way around. So the collage becomes, I mean, it's of course a digital collage, becomes somehow a device to design at a certain point. I mean, we don't necessarily start with this. I mean, somewhere in the middle of that process. So that's why it's so important for us.
All right. Well, thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we did not exhaust everybody.